Again, my name is Kelsey O'Shea. I am the Farm Business Management Specialist for the North Country Regional Ag Team. Today, I'm going to be talking to you guys about the labor updates. So just a quick show of hands for those farmers I have in the room. How many people have employees? Even one. Even one. So maybe one couple. Okay. So, and for the ag professionals in the room, I'm sure though that you're hearing about this. If it's not directly applicable to you, you've heard about it before. So I kind of like to think of this whole labor thing as an iceberg, right? I mean, we've got just the tip of the iceberg coming out this January 1, but there is a lot of meat and potatoes under the surface that we're going to go over. I'm going to hit the highlights. What I won't be getting into today is the exact calculations of overtime for specific farms and a couple other like the exact calculations of unemployment or disability. What I would recommend though, if those are things that you're looking for or you need to know more about, we can meet one-on-one. We have some resources through Cornell that can help you do those calculations as well. So I would encourage you to reach out to me afterwards. So we'll jump in with the new rules and overview. So as of January 1, the New York State Farm Labor Fair Practices Act took effect. Now this was voted on back in the fall, and it was changed many times from what was originally presented. So what was originally presented to New York State was anything overtime above 40 hours, as opposed to what it ended up being 60 hours, in addition to some more stringent payroll regulations. Thanks to some lobbying efforts from some groups, including Farm Bureau and some others, there was some negotiations that went on. We found some middle ground. So it is now effective. The primary areas, I would say, of this particular piece of legislation include insurance and disability, day of rest and overtime, and collective bargaining. So those are the three really big topic area changes that occurred with this new legislation. So what I would encourage everybody to do today while we're talking is to, evaluate throughout the presentation, take notes. Am I compliant? Or maybe are the farms that I work with compliant? And where you might see some of those issues come up of a lack of compliance. And then also jot down maybe the ways that either you can help farms that you work with or make your farm compliant with the new rules. And then, of course, there's the planning stage of when I go home, what do I actually need to do? How do I make these changes, including whether that be training, including some different personnel in the process, hiring outside third-party people to do payroll, that sort of stuff, and then estimating the cost to become compliant, because we do recognize that some of these new rules will require additional costs on the farm. And then executing those, document your timeline. So, making that effort to say, okay, if I'm not compliant right now, I need to be within the next 2 months. And how am I going to do that? Who do I need to get a hold of? Maybe utilizing some consultants or myself or other people from Extension to help keep you on track, or farms you work with on track. So that's just the overview of kind of how this is going to go today. We'll jump into the insurance and workers' compensation changes. So these are two primary areas where this legislation changes the way we normally treat employees and do payroll. So workers' compensation, now employers are required to provide workers' compensation coverage for their employees regardless of annual payroll size. Okay, so that is a change for us, regardless of annual payroll size. In addition, listed changes include all posters must be displayed in English and Spanish. Employees can get their posters from either whatever insurance company they work with for workers' compensation or through that particular email. And then just as a note, employers should be aware and make sure their farm contractors are aware that upon receiving notice of an injury or illness, farm contractors must notify the employer, owner, or operator. But the basic gist of that last piece right here, this notice requirements, is that with this, now that there is no minimum payroll requirement, and now that everybody has to be subject to this, is that you have to follow through with the reporting. When somebody gets hurt on the farm, an incident report needs to be completed and it needs to be sent to comp. Okay, so realistically, if you're going to pay for this workers' compensation insurance. If you're going to pay this premium, utilize the system, follow the rules. It makes everybody's life a little bit easier. Disability and FMLA. So farm employers, owners, and operators are now required to provide disability benefits and New York paid family medical leave coverage. So employers are not required to obtain coverage for their own minor children or students in elementary and secondary schools. So this absolutely cracks me up, because based on the child labor laws in New York State, I can't think of a single way that an elementary school student could legitimately work on a farm through payroll. So I don't know if this is just temptation to break the law or what this is, but secondary schools, yes, your high school kids can have their work permits. There's certain limitations as to what work they can do. If you need further information on what work high school students can do, definitely contact me. I have a nice pamphlet on that explains, because there is a limitation as to what equipment they can operate, how many hours they can work, and what exactly they can do. So with that, you don't have to have disability coverage on your own minor children. So for the disability, employee payroll contributions pay a portion of the coverage. You can withhold 0.5% of an employee's gross wages up to a maximum of 60 cents per week, and then you must pay the remaining costs. So basically, they pay a portion, you pay a portion. For those who have worked and taken a wage, you see on your W-2 at the end of the year, there's that New York SDI section that has usually kind of what I would consider a nominal dollar amount. It's not a huge amount on there. You now have to make sure you're doing this for your employees if you are completing payroll, even if it's only one employee. So for the paid family leave, employee payroll contributions pay for the entire cost of the coverage. So the withholding rate is set by the department each year. So the employees are paying for that portion of it for the cost of the coverage. So that's a little bit about that. Again, they aren't gigantic changes, but they're things that need to be included in payroll. And the reason I bring it up is because New York State requires that all of us do our quarterly filings online. So what that means is the state has a really quick and easy way in real time to check if you're compliant. Does that make sense? So when they get the online quarterlies and there's no New York State disability anything on there, they're going to say, wait a second, hold the phone. What are you doing? So that's just something to be aware of. We want to make sure we make those changes in a timely fashion. This is the big one that everybody really got pretty excited about, right? Overtime and day of rest. So who's heard some stuff about this? I'm sure everybody has, right? This overtime day of rest. So I sat in on a meeting with New York State Department of Labor, and then ultimately later on the PERB, the Public Relations Board. But New York State Department of Labor was the primary folks who were dealing with this overtime and day of rest situation. So we have at Cornell developed resources to help you calculate your potential overtime. So if you have employees currently working over 60 hours a week that you're paying on payroll, so anybody who's not an owner, right? We have a spreadsheet that you can plug in how many hours they're working, what they're making now, and what the actual overtime cost would be to your farm. So the reason we did this is to help farms evaluate whether or not it makes sense to just pay that additional overtime, or if it makes sense to possibly hire another employee and back down one employee's hours to below the overtime threshold. And it all depends on your particular farm situation, right? So you've got to do some evaluation and calculation there. So it needs to be based on, when we talk about overtime, right, the big thing is anything above and beyond 60 hours has to be paid at time and a half, okay? Time and a half is based on the regular rate. And believe me, when the state said this to me, said this to us, said regular rate, I thought, man, I have no idea what that means. What is the regular rate according to the state? So to them, the regular rate is very specific because it's not just the stated hourly wage rate, right? So like, let's say you tell your employee, I pay you $12 an hour, okay? But they get quality bonuses if we hit under 100,000 somatic cell, they get a bonus. Now, you don't know if they're going to get that bonus or not, right? But it's non-discretionary in that if they hit that goal, if the farm hits that goal, that employee is getting that money. It's not up to you whether or not they get it in that respect. That bonus needs to be included in the regular rate. So what that means is that you need to, when paying them overtime, consider if they got a bonus in the last quarter, for example, their regular rate that then you add time and a half to isn't just the $12 an hour. It's the $12 an hour plus the bonus that you gave them spread out over the hours that they worked for that relevant bonus on the hourly rate multiplied by time and a half. Isn't that super fun? No, not fun at all. So what we're encouraging is, now I know that farms do many different types of bonuses. The big thing I can tell you from the state is if it's a non-discretionary bonus. So that means if we hit a goal, or if there's, if you have it like a safety bonus, for example, nobody gets hurt for a quarter, everybody gets $50. That's non-discretionary in the sense that it's written in, they're going to get it if they perform. I can't take it away as an owner at my discretion. Discretionary bonuses do not have to be included in the regular rate. So if you give a bonus out of the kindness of your heart, Christmas, right? Everybody gets $100 at Christmas. Just because I want to, no particular reason, they didn't have to hit any goals, that does not have to be included in the regular rate. I mean, I'm not encouraging everybody to do non-discretionary bonuses or to give bonuses willy-nilly, because that's really difficult for employee morale, right? That creates a whole other set of problems. So we don't want to manage ourselves into a corner trying to avoid this regular rate thing. Just be aware of it. So, and of course, the overtime is above and beyond 60 hours. Now, I know that during planting and harvest season, hitting 60 hours is not that difficult, right? I mean, there's easily employees that will hit that without even blinking an eyeball. What we were a little discouraged about in the meetings is that with this legislation, they have chosen to review whether or not 60 hours is the appropriate threshold as early as March or April of this year. So, in roughly 2.5, 3 months, which is really not helpful when we, by that time, will have not gone through a planting or a harvest season. So unfortunately, from the perspective of this board of 5 that's going to review this, they may look at this and say, well, hardly anybody's even hitting 60 hours. We can crank overtime down to 40. Well, that's kind of a false view of our industry, right? Because we haven't planted or harvested anything. So we're hopeful that this group of 5, really looks at this judiciously. Now, they can make the decision, as I understand it, this board of 5 people can make the decision to say, we don't have enough data. We're not going to move the overtime threshold because we don't know enough. That is an option. That is my hope, because I don't think we will have enough data, quite frankly. But just be aware of that. So around that March, April, May time, we should be hearing something from this group to say whether or not, because part of the legislation, again, is that there's continual reviews as to whether or not 60 hours is the appropriate threshold. Okay, day of rest. Employers must provide at least 1 day. Now, 1 day is it's a strange concept in that it's not 36 hours, it's 24 hours. Okay, so normally when we think about a day off, right, an employee leaves work at 8 p.m., they have 12 hours of sleeping, they have 12 hours of day off, and then they have 12 more hours of sleeping before they go back to work, right? So that's 36 hours. So the day of rest, though, they made it such that it's only 24 hours, a provided mandatory voluntary. So you have to offer it to them. They do not have to take it. Does that make sense? So, and again, that 24 hours piece is kind of key there, depending on how you're going to do your scheduling. So in theory, you could have someone finish work at 8 p.m., 12 hours of sleep, 12 hours of day, go back to work at 8 p.m. that next day. Right? In theory, just throwing that out there. So And it must occur, employees must have day of rest every calendar week. So the employer must designate and notify the worker in advance of their day of rest. And whenever possible, which this is a piece of the legislation that it sort of eluded me at first, whenever possible, line it up with their time of religious worship. So whether that be Sundays for church or Saturdays or whatever that is, as much as possible, you need to try and line it up with that. Farm workers are permitted to voluntarily work on the day of rest, provided that the employer pays the overtime rate. Where this gets kind of goofy is with high school kids. So there's enough farms out there that employ high school kids like 2 hours every day to feed calves, right? They come every day though, because they only work for 2 hours a day. That seventh day, you must pay them overtime for those 2 hours. Because you have offered a day of rest. They have chosen to work anyways. It doesn't matter that they haven't hit the 60-hour threshold. Doesn't matter. Must pay overtime for those 2 hours. So your part-time people who work 7 days a week, if there's any way to kind of rearrange the schedule, if you're not looking to pay overtime, such that they can have a day of rest within the calendar week, that's pretty important. I would say if you're trying to avoid having to pay the overtime rate. So that's overtime and day of rest. Into collective bargaining, this is a great big unknown territory for us. So this is unions, right? California has had unions on farms for a while now, but this is obviously all brand new to us. What we learned in having meetings with New York State or with the department is that the union side of things is managed by the PERB, so the Public Relations Board at New York State, which seems a little weird to me, but that's who manages it. So we had the PERB come in at the Labor Roadshow and talk to us a lot about how this all goes and what the rules are. The big things I took away from their meeting is that really to review your visitor policy on the farm. Those who are looking to solicit employees into joining a union cannot take up employees' work time. You cannot do it on work time. Okay? So making sure that you have a really good visitor policy. So anybody who comes on your farm has to check in at the office. You can't just go right off and find employees or host a meeting or anything like that, because they should not be soliciting employees during their work time. Has to be in the employee's off time. Where this gets a little confusing is when you have employees that live on the premises, right? So you as a farm owner own the land, but you have employees who are living there who have what we call tenants' rights of being there. Those union groups are allowed to talk with your employees on your property on their off time. Even though it's your property, okay, they are allowed to come on and talk to you as long as it's not during work time. They're not violent or disruptive or any of these other things. They are legally allowed to go there and talk to your employees. So it shall be and basically the gist of this is it shall be an unfair labor practice for an agriculture employer to discourage union organization or to discourage an employee from participating in a union organizing drive, engaging in protected or concerted activity, or otherwise exercising the rights guaranteed under this article. So you've got to be really judicious with talking with your employees about unions. A common phrase that we've heard a lot of is when your employees might ask you, hey, this union person came up to me, I don't know what to do. Should we think about doing a union? Most farmers are choosing to say, that's up to you. I would highly recommend that you do a lot of research. Maybe here's some more information, or here's some other people you can talk to. That's about it. You don't want to indicate your personal feelings, because even, and it's very explicit that, and we'll go into what you can say and what you cannot say. You can give them facts. You can share factual information about the process and how it works, how the deductions work. What you can't say is, here's the facts. Here's how much we're going to take out of your paycheck, and I really don't think you should do it because, if you do, I'm going to fire you, right? None of that. You can give your opinions. You can make your personal opinions about a union, whether supportive or not. I would be highly cautious about this because the follow-up needs to be, I'm not in favor of a union, but I will absolutely respect the law and your choices. Okay, so if you're going to give an opinion, you need to put a qualifier on it. E is for examples. This one is actually kind of a good one. Examples, I would say, are a great strategy if you have anybody else on your farm. So I heard this anecdote from one farm already, who they have a couple employees who have been a part of a union in the past and hated it. I mean, vehemently disliked it. So their comment to the farm owner was, if anybody thinks they want a union, you tell them to come talk to me. Other employees you have no control over. I would say, recommend them to talk to people who have been in unions, recommend them to do their own research and basically give factual information. So that's the things that we can say. What you cannot say, T is for threats. Don't make threats of, you're going to get fired. You're not going to get any hours. I'm going to cut this back. I is for interrogate. This is especially cautious if you think there might be some union organizing going on. You can't ask about it. You can't sit there and say, hey, did the union people come visit you last night? Because I saw this really weird car in the driveway. And I think that was them. Can't do that. So you cannot interrogate. You basically can only talk with them about it if an employee comes to you first and says, hey, I got all this union information. I don't know what to make of it. I don't know what to do. P is for promise. Cannot promise pay increases, greater benefits, promotions, or other valuable items in exchange for keeping the union out. That's pretty self-explanatory. And S is for surveillance, using spies, whether it be other employees, video cameras, or whatnot. I mean, that seems kind of intuitive, right? We would never want to spy on our employees, but this can come down to even a casual conversation with maybe a manager or another employee of, hey, have you heard anybody interested in a union? That could be considered under this surveillance and spying. So you got to be really judicious with the words that we say. So that's collective bargaining. I will give you the 2 cents when I asked this question of some of the folks at the Labor Roadshow. I said, where are we going to see this? Where are we going to see unions? Is this going to really jump up right at the beginning and we're going to see a whole bunch of these? Their comment to me was, the unions have a good relationship or have a positive relationship with some of the worker justice folks who are primarily focused on immigrant labor, and that most likely they will focus on where they already have connections. So where they've already been, farms they've already been on, farms they know through the whole worker justice system. So whether or not unions will be more common for immigrant or international labor, we have yet to see, but that was their inclination, was that most likely those unions will go where they already have an established connection through another institution or group. Not to say that they won't end up on other operations. That's absolutely yet to be seen. In addition, one other thing that I learned from the Labor Roadshow was that you can have more than one union on one farm. So it has been deemed that dairy farming in and of itself is not a singular sector. So you could have a milkers union and a crop workers union and a shop guys union and a maternity union, in theory. Okay? They have not deemed that dairy farming is as one industry. This isn't like the teachers union that's like, right, one big umbrella. That's not how this is yet. We'll see how things transpire. Maybe someday it'll look like that. But for now, there is the possibility of multiple unions on one farm. Everyone's like, oh, great. In addition to that, the other thing that I will add is that if you do get a union vote and they do vote it in, even if those employees all leave, you still have the union. Does that make sense? It's not tied to individuals who are working for you. It's tied to then your business and the site. So even if those employees get the vote, you get a union in and they all leave, you still have to offer every employee that comes in the union. It's still there. Okay, action items. Obviously, January 1, if you have farm or if you have changes that you know you need to make as a farm, this is a good time to kind of jot those down, to think about them. The other thing is, if you're a professional working with other farms, maybe thinking about some good questions to just kind of prod our farmers along of, hey, did you get this stuff done? Did you find a payroll service that's going to help with these calculations? How's that overtime thing going? Did you do some different management? So those are the types of things we want to make sure to be checking on. And I know, like I said as well, we may not really hit the overtime issue until spring, until we've got employees that are in the fields for much beyond 60 hours a week. Maybe we can schedule it for right now up until spring such that we're not hitting anybody over that. So the timeline for this is, obviously you want to evaluate today how do we protect our business for tomorrow? We want to make sure we list the changes we need to make. Then we want to go home and execute that plan and make sure we're compliant within the next, if not as soon as possible, within the next couple of months.